West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Hi, I'm Shan Wu with a Undercolor of Law hot take on what it was like inside the Supreme Court courtroom when they handed down the presidential immunity decision. So I've been at the Supreme Court before, but I've never actually been there for when they make the announcements. So it's kind of an interesting experience to go there. So for those of you who haven't been to the Supreme Court before, it's actually it's a very gaudy looking place. They have these giant ceiling to floor red velvet drapes that look like they've been there since Roman times. It's very much the look of the court. It's got like 23-foot high marble columns throughout the courtroom. So there's a very much sort of Greek-Roman feel to it. And it's also very much stage-like because of the curtains, and the judges actually come out from behind the curtains. You don't see that in most courtrooms. The judges aren't behind curtains usually. So in the courtroom, it's a fair amount of anticipation. There usually is. There's a section for the public to sit in, and there's some reserved areas there. And then there's also a section closer, kind of like in the pit, for the members of the Supreme Court bar. Those are the lawyers who may be arguing the case or other members of the bar who can sit there. So beforehand, one thing I was really struck by was the Supreme Court security folks only face the audience. So they're facing the audience, they have their backs to where the justices will sit, to where the lawyers will be. It was very quiet. I mean, you could tell there's some excitement, but people are not talking very loud. But the security was like saying shh, shh, and just kind of telling everyone to be quiet, which I thought was kind of weird. It's like they were anticipating as though there was going to be noise, and there's like never noise in the court. I mean, it's a very strict, very confined kind of environment. So ultimately, I thought it ended up being a little bit of a metaphor for why they were telling the public to be quiet, because it was as though they were anticipating a problem which had never happened, really. And that actually was very much like what happened in the actual majority opinion that Chief Justice Roberts delivered from the bench. So it started out pretty matter of fact, and again, the atmosphere was, I'd say, pretty lighthearted. Justice Amy Coney Barrett actually first read an opinion she'd read, not about immunity, and she even made a little bit of a joke. I mean, she was much more kind of like personable than I expected her to be. She made a joke this was not what everybody was there to hear, and she would be quick, and she wasn't quick. But then when they got to the immunity decision, everyone was very wrapped in their attention, and Chief Justice Roberts read it very matter-of-factly. There's no kind of like dramatic intonation to it. He just kind of read straight through it. I noticed two things. So he's been criticized before for not really giving enough attention to the detail of Trump's actions around January 6th. This time he spent a fair amount of time talking about the allegations about Trump's failures, not calling for the security, not calling for police, the fake electors scheme. So he gave a lot of time to that, although ultimately the decision itself was extremely pro-Trump. The other thing I noticed atmospherically was the rather disengagement of the other conservative justices. I mean, Justice Thomas literally looked like he was leaning back in his chair and resting his eyes at times. Alito, I mean, this may be a stereotype, but I can't help but say he looked rather smug. I mean, he would be looking down like he was doing something while the Chief Justice read. The only person who gave the appearance of paying lip service or facial service to the reading was Brett Kavanaugh, who actually would look towards whoever happened to be reading the opinion. His expression, I wouldn't call it very alert. I mean, it looked a little bit sort of like expressionless, but he would turn his face towards whoever was reading the opinion. So, and Gorsuch was absent for some reason, so there's an empty chair there. As he read the opinion, again, very matter of fact, and then I did notice that Coney Barrett seemed much more, I'd say, uptight. She'd lost the sort of like happy vibe that she had when she was reading her opinion. It may have been because she was anticipating what Justice Sotomayor's dissent was going to be like. They would know what the dissents are because they've read all the opinions ahead of time. So when it got to the dissent really took apart the majority opinion. So let's just talk a little bit about the substance here, which you've probably all read about already. My main beef with this case is that the U.S. Supreme Court didn't have to take the case. As we know, they have 100% discretion. They don't really have to take cases. People can appeal as a right to them in certain kinds of cases, but that doesn't mean that the court has to take the case. Here, Judge Chutkan, as well as the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, had done a very good job in the lower court decisions, particularly the D.C. Circuit, which took a little bit longer than we wanted. But they wrote a very strong opinion rejecting Trump's claims of absolute immunity for presidential actions. Nonetheless, this Supreme Court took the case, and then, boy, did they take a long time after the arguments to decide it. Perhaps not long by normal Supreme Court standards, but again, they've shown the ability to expedite things when they want to. For example, when Trump was going to be kicked off the ballot, they almost immediately got to that case and said, no, he can be on the ballot. So, why did they delay so long? Speculation, they're being partisan just to help him, possible, or that there was a lot of negotiations over the opinions to be sorted out. Now that we have the opinion, I don't really buy the second one. I mean, was straight down partisan line, 6-3, right? 6 conservatives against the 3 progressives. So I don't know how much negotiation there would have been. So the heart of the decision is that the majority is so worried that if American presidents are ever prosecuted, that in the future, presidents will be really worried. They'll be paralyzed with indecision because they fear that anything they do might subject them to prosecution later. Pay no attention to the fact that that's never actually happened in almost 250 years. No other president has been charged with anything. So the fact that the majority was so concerned about this danger that has never happened before seems kind of silly. Also, they make a big show of talking about the Constitution, of course, and the historical precedent, and how there's never been anything like this before. Again, there's never been anything like this before because it hasn't happened. No other president has done anything like this. Now, there are 2 concurrences. Justice Thomas also concurred, and he wrote sort of an unnecessarily long concurrence, I thought, but his whole beef was that he felt that the special counsel, Jack Smith, was an unconstitutional appointment. So that was what Thomas wanted to say. Amy Coney Barrett, very interesting, wrote a separate concurrence. And, I've said before, she is no savior for the court, but she is showing some splits in terms of her legal analysis from folks like Alito and Thomas. And interestingly enough, she is the one who was not previously served in a Republican administration or any administration. She was a law professor. So some of that basic DNA may be starting to show itself, because a part of Chief Justice Roberts' opinion that was particularly irritating was after they make these distinctions between the kinds of immunity, One of the points he made was very much of an evidentiary one, and let me talk about that in a second. I'll give you the 3 buckets first. First thing I said was, bucket 1, core presidential powers, total absolute immunity. What's an example of that? Commander-in-chief. You cannot second guess anything the president's doing when he's acting as the commander-in-chief. Okay. Bucket 2, not core, but official acts. What's an example of that? SCOTUS suggested an official act might be if the president's talking to their attorney general, which Trump did, trying to get Barr to help him overthrow the election. That's walled off. Can't look at that because it's an official act. He's talking to his AG. Maybe also when he talked with Mike Pence, trying to get Pence to unconstitutionally stop the Electoral College count, but he is talking to his VP. Maybe that's an official act too. Third bucket, non-official acts, purely private acts, no immunity. Those, you would think there'd be some no-brainer examples of that, which Sotomayor's dissent pointed out, which is when Trump is talking purely with his private attorneys, getting them to gin up these nonsense arguments about challenging the election, the fake electors, etc., that seems like a purely private act. There's nothing official about that. Even those, however, SCOTUS said, we can't really tell. All this they kicked back down to the trial court to say, figure it out, develop the record, give us a better record. But those are the 3 buckets. Going back to Amy Coney Barrett for a second, the bucket that she had a problem with was the official powers bucket. Chief Justice Roberts said, even if you have private acts, the evidence to support that case based on private acts, you can't use any evidence that might be under the official acts. What's that mean? Let's say Trump took a bribe for appointing someone. If part of that was he was talking to someone to order them, hey, appoint so-and-so the ambassador, I got money. That communication, appoint so-and-so because I got the money, that can't come in because talking to the Secretary of State, that's an official act. So Coney Barrett correctly pointed out that that doesn't really make any sense. That's an evidentiary question. It doesn't go to immunity, and it's going to hamstring any prosecutions here. So that was kind of her point on that. But just a concurrence is really just people expressing their opinion. So let's go to the power of Sotomayor's dissent. So first of all, she points out that history is really on her side, and Justice Jackson, who also joined her, and Justice Kagan. Meaning, the Constitution says nothing about there being presidential immunity. It simply doesn't exist in there. In fact, if you go back to sort of this originalist notion of what did the framers intend, in the Federalist Papers, it's pretty clear that the framers contemplated the possibility of a president being held accountable for committing a crime. They probably just didn't think was going to occur that often. And it hasn't. In 250 years, first time we have a president charged. Sotomayor, really takes apart what the majority has done here, saying that in creating this very torturous series of buckets, it makes the immunity so powerful that it would be nearly impossible to charge a president for acts that happened while he was president. And it was a great dissent. It was very powerful, and she punctuated it by turning at times to the conservative side. Amy Coney Barrett was kind of sitting next to her, was staring straight ahead, but Sotomayor would turn towards the Chief Justice to kind of punctuate particular parts of her dissent. And one important part of that dissent was, it's very traditional that in dissenting opinions, that the word respectfully is always there. The justice who's disagreeing will say, I therefore respectfully dissent. She omitted that. It didn't say respectfully. Same thing with Justice Jackson's concurrence, omitted the word respectfully. And what really struck me was, as she turned towards Roberts to make these points, in normal conversation, someone's turning towards you to make a point. We do this on TV all the time. You kind of make eye contact, you look like you're listening, you nod, maybe you smile, you do something to include them. Roberts did none of that. He didn't even look up at her, didn't make eye contact, didn't acknowledge the fact that she was speaking to him. And in that, I really saw the enormous isolation of the liberal wing of the court now. They are isolated. There is no working with the conservative wing. And as she pointed out, this group of conservatives simply changes the law based on, as she termed it, brute force. So that was my take on being in the courtroom for this presidential immunity decision. Immediately what happens goes back to Judge Chutkan to figure out which of these things might fall into which bucket. That's going to be appealed, and then that appeal to the DC Circuit will then go back to the U.S. Supreme Court. So we can see that this process is not ending anytime soon.
It is Wednesday, the 3rd of July of 2024, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English Bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef. Precious, the little Yorkie, of course, is convalescing, and she is out in the sun at the moment on her own accord. So we will be seating you directly for our especially special daily special, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Will no one rid us of these meddlesome priests? And a few of them happen to be sitting on the Supreme Court. Inquisitors. Yes. Well, I'm quite upset. Who wouldn't be that, who has the middle name of Justice? Yes, it's my middle name. So, what is my first name? That would be Royal. Don't ask me why. My mom was a beatnik. Okay, that's the only answer I can give. Roy for short. But still. So I always like to say that, if anybody knows about official acts, I should by definition. And even I think this ruling is such a ridiculous ruling by obvious partisans bent on destroying America as we know it because they know better. And as I went off yesterday, they consider themselves to be our betters. Can't tell you how many parts per million of H2S can kill you in a confined space, but they know better than the people who can. Oh, boy. Now, they are using precedent of some sort in that this ruling is narrowed not for all presidents, especially Democratic ones, but truly only about Trump and anybody like him. Okay, so they're grooming them now, or have been for some time, because that's the way the Heritage Foundation and the Federalist Society works. It's the Stepford wives of judicial and political appointments. And electeds, too. Jesus, they just pump them out. I want to see the inside wiring. All right? Something's not wired up right there. Of course, they would say it's wired exactly the way they want to have it. In fact, it's the right way. Of course it is. So, I suppose we can go to vote, but now they're trying to take our candidates away in the waning weeks of the election. Oh, he's too feeble now. Jeez. And you read headlines from 2016 about Hillary Clinton, and it's the exact same one, except it's not Hillary, it's Joe. It is unbelievable. And then it turned out that all of that back then in 2016 was Russian and Chinese psyops. And it looks like the same stuff. So, now you know and I know. It takes a lot less to buy off a journalist than it does, a Supreme Court justice. You know, you're not going to go up to a journalist and say, here, let me give you, a several $100,000 RV, have fun, and why don't we have cigars here in the statuary garden of dictators we love? Oh, can I come? I need access. All right. So, I thought this was a great experiment. When I heard it was a great experiment, I put the emphasis on great. This is really great that we're doing this experiment. So our betters have now decided that the experiment's over. It doesn't work for them. So we got to get rid of it. We got to go back to monarchy. And we're supposed to sit here and take it? The Heritage Foundation just spits in our face and says, oh, it'll be bloodless if the left decides it will be. What? By the power of our pen will be enough for you to come and want to slit our throats in the middle of the night, in the night of long knives? Is that what you're talking about, Mr. Heritage Foundation? Sieg Heil this mofo. Oh, boy. They want violence in the streets. They want a reaction. And you know how it works in basketball. Anybody who reacts to the foul gets called for the foul. It's the reaction, not the actual motivation. You can't use the motivation of the person who committed the crime. Now, I don't know about you and me, but motivation is like a bedrock principle in Law and Order. And we knew that even before Perry Mason, let alone Law and Order. Jeez. But, my convalescing dog seems to sprung to even more life. She's been actually doing quite well. I'm going to break off this little rant, but because we have to get into it, I spent a considerable time actually getting her, giving her some love. All right, she wanted food, and I take a little bit of time to make sure she gets her little pill, which I presume maybe doesn't need it anymore because it was for the meningitis and not the leukemia. But then I, sat with her and gave her, I call it the liquid medicine. That's the prednisone, the steroid, which makes her feel good. It's like a pain medication of sorts. And she's just been doing quite well. So, considering, but it's breaking my heart nonetheless. So I'm giving her a bit of time, and I apologize for the longer clips at the top and the abbreviated format for the show. Even the long rants, I apologize for it all. I'm sorry. But I just... You understand. Living things need love, okay? Especially when they're close by. And so I decided, even though the show must go on, not at the expense of, a living life that is dependent upon, us, because we made it so. Okay, well, maybe I should just tell you what we have in store for you here in the rest of this salon that we call West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy as we begin in the Bistro Cafe part of it, because we still have the chef's table. See, in America, everything's backwards, okay? We serve the salad first, and we have the amuse-bouche at the end of the chef's table. Usually it's the other way around. You sit at the chef's table, then you come out in the common area, but we do it differently here because the chef's table is on the way to the Speakeasy, just so you know. Nonetheless, as we begin in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, at the top, yes, I actually like Shanlin Wu. He's engaged with me a bit, and that was very kind of him. But he reported on what it was like inside the Supreme Court. Yes, the palatial Greek Roman colonnaded Supreme Court. They want you to know who's boss. No wonder they think they are our betters. Okay. On the rest of the menu here, federal officials are seeking to overhaul how Medicare pays health care providers after a $3 billion scheme to defraud the program. All right. And then MAGA blames Medicare and not the people defrauding it because that's what crooks do. Stupid marks, they let us do it. The Department of Justice announced a policy change agreement after accusing educators in Kansas's largest public school or school district of discriminating against black and disabled students when they were disciplining them. Okay, I like that. Spare the rod for the white kids, beat the crap out of all the others. And the National Black Farmers Association called on Tractor Supply's president and CEO to step down after the rural retailer, say that real fast, announced it would drop most of its corporate diversity and climate advocacy efforts. Well, they're going to lose a lot of business because they gave in to hate. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where a court in Belarus sentenced 20 political analysts to prison terms of at least 10 years each after convicting them in absentia of conspiracy to overthrow the government. Any criticism is overthrowing the government. Coming to an America near you, and 10 members of a nonviolent Cambodian environmental activist group were each sentenced to 6 years in prison on charges of conspiring against their state. Wow, it's like an infection. It's going around, isn't it? All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Going to tuck into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and it's by Dan Diamond and Lauren Weber from the Washington Post. Federal officials are seeking to overhaul how Medicare pays health care providers after a $1 billion scheme to defraud the program, which would be one of the largest such schemes in its history, even bigger than Rick Scott's, or maybe not as big, but big. For more than a year, officials said, about a dozen companies submitted bills to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services for tens of millions of urinary catheters using the personal information of Medicare beneficiaries and physicians, some of whom still have questions about how the companies obtained their private details and used them to bill the federal health program for catheters that they never wanted nor received. Experts said the catheter fraud ring is just the latest reminder that Medicare is a tempting target for scammers. The roughly $1 trillion agency has long struggled to combat a stream of fraudulent claims for durable medical equipment, and CMS leaders have urged Congress to provide them with additional resources to crack down on would-be thieves. But why would a Republican Congress want to do that? Because why would they want Medicare to succeed? They don't. So anything that can bring it down, like theft, from their criminal friends? Trust me. Healthcare providers also urged the government to clamp down on companies, saying the alleged scheme threatened to distort Medicare payments by making it appear that doctors were ordering massive amounts of unnecessary catheters and skewing the government's formula for reimbursing providers. We've never seen anything like this in size and scope, said Cliff Gauss, CEO of the National Association of Accountable Care Organizations, which helped uncover and spotlight the fraud earlier this year. Hannah of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Educators in Kansas's largest public school district discriminated against black and disabled students when disciplining them, according to the U.S. Department of Justice, which announced an agreement yesterday, Tuesday, that will have the district revising its policies. Changes the Wichita district has agreed to include restraining unruly students less often and ending the practice of putting misbehaving students alone in rooms by January 1st of 2025, the DOJ said. I remember those days. They used to put me in a little room, and I'm telling you, a little room barely big enough for a small kid desk and a chair and a jar of peanut butter. How dare they? The district also agreed to offer counseling or tutoring to every student who was confined alone in a room during the past 3 school years, with the number of hours matching those for which the student was secluded. The department said the district already is writing a new code of conduct for students and has scheduled crisis prevention training for staff. I should mention I was put in the small room and I forgot to tell you, not only peanut butter, but saltines. No water. We called it the peanut butter conspiracy because of, there was a band called that back in the day. Regardless, I was put in the room because of my anti-war sentiments and activities on campus. Oh, I was in junior high. Just a kid. They didn't care. Now, the agreement comes amid an ongoing national debate about classroom discipline and whether punishments for minority and disabled students are disproportionately harsh. The Justice Department has previously reached similar agreements with other school districts in the United States. Grantham Phillips and Hallelujah Hedero of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The National Black Farmers Association called on Tractor Supply's president and CEO yesterday, Tuesday, to step down after the rural retailer announced that it would drop most of its corporate diversity and climate advocacy efforts. The resignation demand emerged as Tractor Supply, which sells products ranging from farming equipment to pet supply, faces a deepening backlash over its decision, which itself came after conservative activists spoke out against the company's work to be more socially inclusive and to curb climate change. In a public announcement last week, the company said it would eliminate all of its diversity, equity, and inclusion roles and sponsorships of non-business activities like pride festivals and withdraw its goals for reducing carbon emissions. Critics of the new position argue that Tractor Supply is giving in to hate and harming its customers by abandoning crucial principles. And they couldn't be more correct. And the National Black Farmers Association actually is a sizable block of consumers who buys a considerable amount of product through Tractor Supply. And they are not the only ones across America calling for this fellow to step down and withholding their dollars from a company who has given in to hate. And are they going to start promoting hate themselves? Let's hope not. All right, that brings us to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world. And we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
Hi, and welcome to Your Health Quickly, a Scientific American podcast series.
On this show, we highlight the latest vital health news, discoveries that affect your body and your mind. Every episode, we dive into one topic. We discuss diseases, treatments, and some controversies.
And we demystify the medical research in ways you can use to stay healthy. I'm Tanya Lewis.
I'm Josh Fishman.
We're Scientific American's senior health editors.
Today, we're talking about how chat-based AI programs are being used to help diagnose medical problems. They're surprisingly accurate, but they do come with a few pitfalls.
Josh, have you ever used Google to try to diagnose a medical issue?
You mean like typing in, what are the causes of low back pain? Or is drug X the best treatment for glaucoma? Yeah, that happens pretty much every other day, either for me or for someone in my family.
Yeah, I have too. And I know it's a bad idea because somehow every search that I do ends up suggesting that whatever I have is cancer. But now there's a new way to get medical info online. Generative AI chatbots.
Like ChatGPT?
Yeah, like OpenAI's ChatGPT and Microsoft Bing, which is based on the algorithm that powers ChatGPT, and others that are designed specifically to provide medical info, like Google's MedPalm. They're all based on large language models, or LLMs, which predict the next word in a sentence. They're trained on huge amounts of data gleaned from all over the internet, and in some cases, info from medical exams and real doctor-patient interactions.
Do they work better than our simple internet searches?
I wanted to know that too. To find out more, I talked to Sarah Reardon, a science journalist based in Bozeman, Montana, and regular SciAm contributor who has been reporting on AI in medicine for us.
Doctors have been concerned for a long time about people Googling their symptoms. There's this term, Dr. Google, which is really frustrating to a lot of physicians because people come in and think that they know what they have without having the actual expertise or context just by having looked up, I have a headache, what does it mean? GPT software, it's much better at actually being accurate in determining what patients have and asking sometimes follow-up questions that will help it further home in on the correct diagnosis.
Companies are starting to study this, and preliminary research suggests that AIs are surprisingly accurate. Studies have shown that they work better than online symptom checkers, which are websites that let you input your symptoms and spit out a diagnosis. They're also better than some untrained humans.
In a study posted on the preprint server medRxiv in February, which has not yet been peer-reviewed, epidemiologist Andrew Beam of Harvard University and his colleagues wrote 48 prompts phrased as descriptions of his patient's symptoms. When they fed these to OpenAI's GPT-3, which is the version of the algorithm that powered ChatGPT at the time, the top 3 potential diagnoses for each case included the correct one 88% of the time. Physicians, by comparison, could do this 96% of the time when given the same prompts, but people without medical training could do so only 54% of the time.
Okay, so the AIs are good. But physicians were still better in that study, so I'd still rather go to a real one.
Yeah, absolutely. These AI programs should not be used to diagnose a serious illness, and many of them say so. For that, you should definitely see a doctor. But they're probably a step up from just Googling your symptoms. I tried telling ChatGPT about some characteristic stroke symptoms, like numbness in my face and trouble speaking and walking. It came back with a list of likely causes, with stroke at the top, followed by transient ischemic attacks and multiple sclerosis. To its credit, it also told me to seek immediate medical care. But I haven't tried it with more complex or vague symptoms. Now some healthcare providers are already using these AIs to help communicate with patients.
Some of the doctors that I spoke with are starting to play with it, helping them phrase things, helping them sort of condense their thoughts into what would be a short, concise text message. There's a lot of talk about hospitals might start actually incorporating some of this software soon.
These AI programs could help doctors deal with some of the administrative grunt work so that they have more time to actually spend with patients. And the breakthrough isn't just the AI itself. It's the fact that you can ask it questions in plain English, rather than listing off a bunch of symptoms and having it calculate the statistical likelihood of some diagnosis. But there are some dangers, too.
It's not nearly as accurate as a doctor, and there's this known problem with GPT and some of these other similar AI programs where they will do what's called hallucinate and just come up with information on their own, just make stories up, come up with references that don't exist.
And that's not the only concern.
There's this huge history in medicine of racism, classism, lots of other isms, and that's baked into a lot of medical literature, some of these assumptions about like how Black people respond to pain medication, for instance, that have been completely dismissed as junk science nowadays, but still exist in a lot of the literature that ChatGPT and other programs are trained on. There's huge problem with racism in medicine in general, but that sort of thing could just be amplified if it's drawing from a program rather than someone who's consciously thinking about these things.
So these AIs might actually replicate some of the existing human biases that are already in medicine.
Exactly. And these programs also pose privacy concerns.
The big tech companies, Google, OpenAI, others that are making these programs are to varying extents using some of the information that people put into it to help inform better versions of the algorithm in the future. So there's a lot of concern about how that's going to be dealt with from a regulatory standpoint going forward, making sure that these companies are protecting patient privacy.
When Sarah talked to OpenAI, Google, and other companies, they said they are aware of all these concerns and are trying to develop versions of their software that are more accurate and secure.
Well, if tech companies do address these issues, is there one health specialty where AI could be particularly useful?
Yeah, it's actually becoming quite common in mental health through the use of therapy apps.
So mental health is actually one of the areas where people think that this software could be most helpful for several reasons, one of which is that a lot of the therapies are based on chat.
This could help address the severe shortage of therapists in this country, if we can get it right.
So it sounds like, whether we like it or not, AI is going to be a big part of medicine.
It is. But when it comes to our health, we need to ensure that these programs first do no harm.
Your Health Quickly is produced by Talika Bose, Jeff Delvicio, Kelso Harper, and Corinne Leong. It's edited by Ella Fetter and Alexa Lim. Our music is composed by Dominic Smith.
Our show is part of Scientific American's podcast, Science Quickly. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you like the show, give us a rating or review. And if you have ideas for topics we should cover, send us an email at yourhealthquickly@siam.com. That's yourhealthquickly@sciam.com.
For a daily dose of science, sign up for our new Today in Science newsletter. Our colleague Andrea Garaleski delivers some of the most interesting and awe-inspiring science news and opinion to your inbox each afternoon. We really think you'll enjoy it. Check it out at siam.com/newsletters.
Yeah, it's a great read. I'm Tanya Lewis.
I'm Josh Fishman.
We'll be back in 2 weeks. Thanks for listening.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
You're listening to the American Democracy Minute, keeping your government by and for the people. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled July 1st that former President Donald Trump has criminal immunity for his official acts as president, but not for private acts. The majority's decision was not quite a get-out-of-jail-free card, but expanded the official powers of the president to near authoritarian levels. While they failed to define those official and private acts, conservative justices did specify that Trump's conversations with former Vice President Mike Pence to overturn the 2020 election results and all other communications were official duties and can't be used as evidence. Likewise, Trump's attempts to manipulate the U.S. Justice Department to end investigations are official, no matter how heinous, and can't be used. Critics see such power being exploited by unscrupulous presidents to commit criminal acts without consequence. While the job of prosecutors was made far more difficult, the opinion is less likely to affect the state cases against Trump. The New York hush money cover-up of campaign violations and Trump's effort to overturn Georgia's election results are more likely to be ruled private acts. The special prosecutor's federal cases now return to judges Tanya Chutkan and Eileen Cannon, who must sort out what can and can't be used, a process that will likely take months to resolve. Read the decision and the scathing dissent at AmericanDemocracyMinute.org. We've also linked resources on how to register to vote. I'm Brian Beal.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1937. That was the day Secretary of Labor Frances Perkins announced that sit-down strikes were unsuited to America and believed labor unions would abandon using the tactic altogether. Her declaration came in the form of an open letter to Republican Congressman William Ditter of Pennsylvania. In the wake of the Flint sit-down strike, he had insisted on clarification of her perspective towards sit-down strikes. 1937 had been rocked by a wave of sit-downs everywhere. Workers made huge gains using the tactic, especially during the historic GM strike in Flint, Michigan. During the strike, Secretary Perkins asserted that the legality of sit-downs had not yet been determined. In her open letter, Perkins noted that she accepted the opinion of the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. That court had just ruled that thousands of striking hosiery workers at Apex Hosiery in Philadelphia had acted unlawfully when they employed the tactic in their tumultuous strike weeks before. She added, quote, "It is not and never has been an official position of the Department of Labor or the Secretary that sit-down strikes are either lawful, desirable, or appropriate. In fact, the officers of the Department and the Secretary have urged union leaders and members not to use the method and to bend every effort to take men out of a plant where used. It is also full of hazards to the progressive democratic development of trade unionism and to the orderly process of collective bargaining and cooperation with employers on the basis of a recognized status. Perkins' statement helped provide the basis for a legal backlash against the tactic, ruled illegal just 2 years later. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. We always begin, whether from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 60 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting highs in the mid to upper 90s. Winds out of the north-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Clear skies overnight with lows thankfully in the mid-50s. Winds out of the north-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour, then mainly sunny and hot tomorrow. Oh, did I mention we're in a excessive heat advisory? Because we will have highs near 105 tomorrow with winds out of the north-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Overnight lows over the weekend in the mid to upper 60s. That's not good. Daytime temperatures Friday, Saturday, and Sunday around 115 degrees Fahrenheit. Oh my God. Okay, well, we know how to survive in it, do we? Grass pollen is rated high, and boy, can I attest to that here in Rogue River. The air quality index for the region is in the good range at 25 parts per million, and that daytime UV index is very high at level 9, and of course, you know to take care. Barometric pressure is falling at 30.16 inches. Visibility is up to 10 miles, and relative humidity is at 62%, and it's going to dry out a lot more than that as the day progresses. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and that is the Weather Underground, don't you know? Yes, you do. London, actually, Mayfair, which is right along the River Thames, right there in the heart of London, is registering 66 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 70 degrees and fair. Rome is 75 degrees and partly cloudy with a thunderstorm advisory. Kabul is 80 degrees and clear. Hong Kong is 77 with light rain. Tokyo is 80 degrees and mostly cloudy. Auckland, New Zealand is 45 degrees and fair. San Francisco, California is 70 degrees and sunny with its own heat advisory because San Francisco is going to be about 80 degrees. Yeah. There's no air conditioning there, so it's coming off the bay. And if it's hot on the bay, it's hot even more in your flat in the upper 8. Yeah, I'm telling you. Okay, so Chicago, Illinois is 77 degrees and cloudy, and New York is 78 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. desk of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. A court in Belarus has sentenced 20 political analysts to prison terms of at least 10 years each after convicting them in absentia of conspiracy to overthrow the government and taking part in an extremist group. The analysts all live outside Belarus but could be in prison upon returning to the authoritarian state. The convictions and sentences announced come as a relentless crackdown has put many prominent opposition figures in prison and forced others to flee Belarus. The crackdown began after mass demonstrations gripped the country following the August 2020 election, whose disputed results gave a sixth term to President Lukashenko, who came to power in 1994, who promised he'd only be dictator for one day. Alexander Dobrovolsky, a top aide to exiled opposition leader Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya. You'll have to excuse me, but this is the way it's going to be. Well, they were sentenced to 11 and a half years. Sentences for the other defendants, including the press secretary Anna Kusalina, ranged from 10 to 11 years. Those convicted include Rayor Astapania, director of the Belarus Initiative at the UK's Chatham House Foreign Affairs Institute, Yahani Kurzanowski, associate researcher at the University of Strasbourg. I so apologize for butchering these people's names. And Katsuriana Shmatsina, policy analyst at Virginia Tech. Dozens of rights groups and independent news media has been shut since the crackdown began. Those imprisoned earlier include Ales Bialatsky, founder of the Vyazna Human Rights Group and a winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. Chang at the Associated Press World Desk brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. 10 members of a Cambodian environmental activist group that campaigned against destructive infrastructure projects and corruption were each sentenced yesterday, Tuesday, to 6 years in prison on charges of conspiring against the state. 3 of the members of the group, Mother Nature Cambodia, were also convicted of insulting the Cambodian king, for which they were sentenced to an additional 2 years in prison, giving them a total of 8 years behind bars. Only 5 of the defendants attended the trial. The others were convicted in absentia. They include 4 Cambodians whose whereabouts are unknown, and Alejandro Gonzalez Davidson, a Spanish national who co-founded the group and was deported in 2015 and barred from ever returning to Cambodia. The 5 who attended the trial were arrested outside the court after the verdict and sentences were issued. They had marched to the Phnom Penh Municipal Court with supporters dressed in traditional white clothing worn at funerals, which they said represented the death of justice in Cambodia. Fawn Koramesme, a 22-year-old member of the group whose mother was by her side, said she was prepared to go to prison. The group last year was the co-winner of the Right Livelihood Award, sometimes characterized as the Alternative Nobel, issued by a Stockholm-based foundation to organizations and individuals working to, quote, safeguard the dignity and livelihoods of communities around the world, end quote. 3 members of the group, who were serving suspended prison sentences at the time, were denied permission by Cambodian court authorities to travel to Sweden to accept the award. Mother Nature, founded in 2012, was deregistered as a non-government organization by the Cambodian government, but its members vowed to carry on its work, with some serving jail time in recent years. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and yes, indeed, we will meet up here tomorrow for Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays on a fabulous July 4th holiday, because, hey, it's early on the West Coast. We got nothing else to do but sleep, and we're not going to do that. We have resistance to do, don't we? So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. De novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.